All right. Thanks, Marissa. So we are here, we're talking about conducting intake at a distance. So on this panel here, it's going to be me. I'm Michael Redman, and I'll talk a little bit about myself in a little bit. And then Charlene Vang from Minneapolis will be the two panelists talking to you today about our experiences and the changes that we've seen in this new role that I think neither of us were in before doing this at a distance. And just like all of us are doing all sorts of things at a distance that we weren't doing before. So as we know, 2020 has been a year of changes, many changes, and that's not news to anyone. Um, so looking from this, at least sort of the statewide perspective, the one sort of big change that might impact intake is that a lot of sites are no longer able to conduct their normal NRS assessments, the pre-tests that they would use with new students when they were coming in and joining the program. So people have adopted different types of tools, and I'll talk about mine specifically. But one of the things that the state allowed was the COVID exemption, which basically allows students to have their hours tracked beyond the normal 12-hour restriction that was in place before. So some sites are doing their NRS testing, so their CASAS and TABE testing, Best Plus, all those NRS approved tests, and other sites are not. But for those that can't do those NRS tests, that COVID exemption is something that sort of allows students to be added to the site and have their hours tracked. So I'm going to specifically talk about myself or my experience at my site in Columbia Heights, Fridley, part of the Metro North Consortium, north of Minneapolis. I've been at the site for 9 or so years and came into the sort of a testing and intake role last fall, and then into the remote intake role all of a sudden in March. So a little bit about our consortium. Our consortium has 11 sites. So we've got some correction sites, some one-room schoolhouse type sites, and then some multi-leveled sites. My experience is pretty much exclusively with my site, which is like a multi-leveled site. Most of the levels are ESL, and then we have a day and a nighttime GED class. We also have career pathways types classes and other types of classes like citizenship class, that sort of thing. I just put a little bit of data in there just for a little bit of comparison purposes here. So our site generally within, last year had about just under 700 students at our sites and just under 100,000 hours. With the COVID pandemic response, we eventually switched all of our classes over to Google Meet. As part of that, our class lengths were halved. So normal classes might have been 3 hours, and then they were shortened to an hour and a half. So that had an impact on how many hours students were coming, as well as just many students never returned to us from when we shut down for COVID. So I just did a little chart at the bottom showing over the same period, from the start of the pandemic this year compared with the last year, a pretty big drop off in students and hours. And I'm a little surprised that the hours per student here didn't go down quite as much, because we are offering classes less, half the time that they normally had before. So I think the students we have are sticking around and doing all of the hours, or they're, collecting more distance learning hours. So as the classes changed, there was changes to intake, how students are brought into our school or brought back into our school if they left. So in terms of data collecting, out went fax machines and carbon copy learner entry forms, and in came Google Forms and tracking that in the sheets. At our site, we have not gotten any remote testing as part of our process, so we switched over to using read theory for our middle to high level students. using some just CASA's sample questions for our low-level students, as well as some math, some Google Forms of some old paper and pencil tests that we had. Different tools for communicating instead of welcoming people in with a smile as they come into the school, making calls with Google Voice, making tutorial videos using screencasts, using email a whole lot more than I ever did, and making some templates to go along with that. Some data tracking tools. You're seeing lots of Google here, Google Sheets and Drive. And then for our orientations, instead of handing them a piece of paper and saying, here's your start date, your start time, let's go show you your classroom, doing a little bit of one-on-one Google Meet just to show them around what that looks like. For many of our students who have not used Google Meet specifically, some were familiar with Zoom, but our site stuck with Google Meet. And of course, this process is just always changing. So all sorts of things changed when data was collected, who got it, how it got put into the system, adding in some other assessments as time went on to sort of make the, onboarding process a little easier for students. And then just trying to keep track of when we're offering all sorts of different classes. So it's always been a lot to keep track of, and everything's changing, as we all know. So I'll just show you how students contact our school. Before, many people would just call the school, and some still do. Or they'd walk in the front door, and some still do. Our secretary in our building, who is often mailing out things, she's in the office, and occasionally we'll, get somebody's information at the door, and then we'll add them into our online system. But students go through the school webpage, and then they just fill out a Google form that they fill out online. And this form asks them sort of what subjects they want to study. This is a consortium-wide learner entry, like a student interest form. So some different sites offer different types of classes. So this sort of filters the students where they could end up placing in. So they choose what types of classes they're interested in, and then what site they're interested in. So this information is collected at the consortium level, and then the data office there sort of sends out, all right, here are the people who are interested in your site in Columbia Heights. So I'm lucky to have that sort of taken care of for me at that level. So our intake process, we get the names, I usually give them a call. I usually like to initiate it with a phone call. I find that's the best way, since many of our students, almost all of our students, are ESL students at some level, from very low all the way up to GED basically. It's a great way to get a read on their at least speaking skills, which helps me determining which reading test I might give them. And then we just sort of get them on their path. And as I sort of note down at the bottom here, the tools are different that I'm using. I'm not using the CASAS and TABE. I'm using different types of assessments, and I'm communicating them electronically one way or the other. But the steps are the same, right? We get their information, collect it, we can put it into this database. They do an assessment, then we place them, and then we do a little bit of an orientation. Those are the steps we do normally. They just look a lot different. For our reading tests, we were at a loss right at the beginning, but we attended one of these webinars in the spring, and the Hub Center was using Read Theory, and we were already using that as a distance learning platform. So we decided to use that as our placement tool, and we've sort of fine-tuned that to a certain degree over time. It doesn't work for every student, as anyone who's used Read Theory knows. So we added in some lower level CASAS quizzes to give us pretty rough estimates of where the best place for the student is. So we have an idea, and then they go into the class, and then the teachers are pretty good about knowing what skills their students are at. So, and then we just sort of track those Read Theory scores as they go through. So I just want to take a pause here and see if there's any questions for me at this point. I don't have the chat up, so.
I don't see any questions, Michael, so looks
Perfect.
like we're good.
Okay, thanks, Charlene. All right. And I just put these, so we have charts. We basically, like I said, we use the Hub Center's charts and adapted it for our site. Sort of, I mapped it onto our old placement levels, and it seems like it works out pretty good. Obviously, there's some fine tuning that's needed to be done, but yeah, it works out well. Additionally, at our site, we have site-wide math classes that are separate from the English levels that we had started doing, I don't know, a year and a half before COVID happened. So we added that into the intake process. So they get a test. Hopefully it's the right test, but if they do well or poorly on that, they'll eventually get another one sort of after they're placed. We have somebody in the morning and night who sort of manages who gets placed into which math group. So they take it from there, but at least we get some feel for their math level during intake. And then once we figure out their level and their placement, we give them a call, figure out if they want their morning class, their nighttime class, give them the schedule, give them the date that we have available for them. And then we do a little bit of an orientation with them using Google Meet, since that's the tool that they will use. All but the very lowest levels. In the very lowest level, the teachers usually initiate a one-on-one call, but in all other cases, we'll show them Google Meet, how to turn their sound on and off, and then let them know that their teacher will give them the link for their class when they join in, whether that's the next week or a couple of weeks down the road. And then just generally some notes about how I do intake is just lots of sheets, lots of Google Sheets. So, and then as time goes on, you know, just like in normal intake, when we would have like an orientation session and then students would have to come back for a testing session, which was a two-step process for our higher level students. Some never came back. That's the same here, right? I will send out the forms. I will send out an assessment. Sometimes just won't hear back, and then, you know, sort of have to drop people from the process. But since I've been collecting all their information, it's pretty easy to drop somebody back in. I got an email on, I think, Tuesday this week of somebody who had dropped out of the process in July, and she's like, sorry, it took me so long to fill these out. Can I join? I was like, sure, welcome back. And so hopefully we'll get her into a class here soon. Yeah. So that is sort of my process. I don't know if there, again, I don't have the chat up, but I don't know if there are any questions.
There is one question from Laura, Michael.
Mhm.
She asked if read theory is used for ABE students too. She likes the online math intake idea.
Yeah, so the read theory seems to work for us basically from, let's say, ESL level 4 all the way on up is what we use it for. We only use the pre-test to get into the details a little bit, which is not, just gives sort of a vague score. So I'm considering actually having them do more quizzes than just the pre-test, but trying to balance like how much time are they spending in front of a computer screen and getting them into the class quicker is always a concern for adults who have lots of things going on in their lives, especially in this year. So, but yeah, we use it for almost all our students, and then just a different sort of quiz for the lower level students.
Two more questions for you, Michael.
Yeah.
One person said, do you have students put their social security numbers in a Google Sheet for registration? And do you use social security numbers on the Google Drive, Google Doc?
No, so that was one thing sort of at the consortium level, they decided right away, as we did not want Google or social security numbers going into forms out of our control. I mean, we felt safe faxing that information, but not putting it into Google Sheets. So yeah, that was one thing that was like the one question that sort of got stripped out of our learner entry forms right away when we started this.
Great. The next person also asked, how often can students start classes? Is it open ongoing or managed enrollment?
Yeah, so our school has open enrollment, so we go year round, except for a couple week breaks throughout the year, but otherwise it's year round. And we just sort of came up with a system that levels would start new students basically every 2 weeks. So up to like say 3 students a week, so as not to overwhelm the teachers and the class with a bunch of new students. So, you know, students might have 3 people starting next week, and then like 3 people, you know, up to 3 people a couple weeks after that. And that was something actually that continued from before COVID, is that we would have max of like 3 students a week. And now we're sort of spacing things out a little bit more. It gives students and teachers more time to integrate into the classroom. All right. Does that sound good? I will say probably yes. And then I'm going to pass the baton here to Charlene.
There was one
Oh,
more
yeah.
question that just showed up.
Mhm.
During your one-on-one orientations, do you share or present any documents? And do you send them any documents to sign, such as an attendance agreement?
We don't have the students sign anything. When I have that conversation, after I have that conversation, I guess I send them an email. So I've come up with templates that are like, this is your start date, start time, here's a normal week schedule, and here's our attendance policy. So we just put back into place a minimum 50% attendance policy. It was higher before, but we just lowered it to sort of, I think, the lowest statewide accepted minimum, which is 50%. So discuss that, but don't have them sign anything about that. They'll get the email and they'll have it and all that sort of thing, but it won't be a signed thing like we might have had before.
One more question, Michael, that popped up. How does it work for students who don't use emails?
Yeah, so it's possible to do it via text. So I've had a handful of people that don't have access to their email or something along those lines. And so I can send them a text with the links. So all of the forms, many of the forms are Google Forms, so they can just do those online. They don't need a login or anything. Though when it comes to Google Meet, occasionally to have the app on your phone, you need to have a Google account, and for Android phones, you have one. And then iPhones, many people have a Gmail, but sometimes that's a little bit of a roadblock in order to get them into the class. But that's a roadblock we need to hit, because when they come to the class, they're going to be using Google Meet. And then at some of our higher levels, they also use Google Classroom. So we actually need to get some people in to have Google accounts. If they have like a Yahoo or a Hotmail, we make them get another one just in order to participate in the class and see the assignments from the teachers.
That's it for questions.
Okay, and that's on their own usually, as having them figure that out. Those are good digital skills, and we do have a staff member who could help out with that. But for the most part, people have enough friends and family who help them out sort of on the back end. All right, I'm going to pass the baton here. Charlene.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlene Vang. I'm from Minneapolis Public Schools Adult Education. We have 2 locations here, one at North Campus at 800 West Broadway, and the other location is at South Campus at 2015 East Lake Street. The next slide will show you our schedules currently for online classes, as well as the website here. This is our website. If you're looking at minimized page, you'll see that there are 3 categories there. So prospective students can register in the area that's in red. And then on the right side is if your page is maximized. On the top right corner is where they can register. Once they click that, our forms are, it's on a Google form, and it's pretty easy to fill out. It's in different languages. So next slide for me. All right, so here's our online class schedules. Monday through Thursdays are for all ELL levels. The HSE subjects and IET classes are also Monday through Thursdays. Some of the IET classes are on Fridays. Our higher level ELL and HSE classes are, some are a hybrid. That means there's 2 days of independent learning and there's 2 days of Schoology conferences with the teachers. Our class time during the daytime is 8:30 to 3:30. And if you're curious what ELL stands for, or HSE or IET, it is on the bottom there. Just you probably haven't seen HSE or IET, but HSE stands for high school education, because we have the adult diploma program at our sites. The IET stands for the, let me see, can't see the very bottom there. It stands for, I can see there.
Integrated
Integrated,
education
yeah.
and training.
There you go. It's not popping up on my screen the right way here. So that's what that stands for. On our evening classes, it runs Monday through Thursdays for all ELL levels and HSE classes. We're from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Our next slide. This is where it all starts. The application online. It is a Google form. It includes attendance and agreements for all new students. And a lot of those questions are based on SID as well. The only thing that does not get entered or does not include in that Google form is the Social Security. That is not part of it at all. Their names, their addresses, their birthday, and possibly their student ID if they have it. That information is on there. But the most important thing is some questions that we put in there is like the preferred language. They want to complete the registration form. And if the student has attended a program before, or if they are a new student, or if they were a previous student from maybe a few years ago. It also asks us if the student has a device that they are using for distance learning, or if they are in need of internet access. So those will help the orientation instructor. Just at the bottom there, it's an example, is an image of our Google form answers. Those are converted from the Google form that the prospective student fills out. Our learner support services team, they're the staff that will be handling all of the intake here, as you can see. Next slide, please, Michael. Intake process continues. We do contact the student within 2 days, confirming their information, their orientation time preference, because we do have morning and evening orientations. All of their information will be updated or entered into SID. The learner support specialist then emails the student our online Google form for the classes reading or tape reading pre-assessment screening. This way we can provide them with a proper orientation placement, especially for ELL students, since we have a low and a high orientation class. This way it's a lot easier. There might be more focus for the lower ELL in orientation class versus the higher ELL class. As you can see, there are 2 links below, and these are all Google forms that we are using for the pre-assessment. Once a student completes and submits that pre-assessment, it will come to us, to the learner support specialist, who enters that pre-assessment score into SID under logs. And this person will then, keep in touch with the student, follow up with them, schedule the orientation based on their needs, and then the registration then is marked as intake complete. Next slide for me, please. This is just an example here how our student registration tracker is built. There are a few statuses just to show what's happening to that registration. There's a drop-down list of showing if it's in progress, if it's a duplicate registration or intake complete. Many times students might submit the registration 3-4 times because they may think it didn't go through. So they may possibly submit duplicate registrations, and those are tagged as such. Once that is completed, down below, you'll see an email template that is done. This is the pre-orientation steps that we send to the prospective student before the orientation class starts. This way they are prepared. There are some videos that is in English, Spanish, Somali, and Hmong. This will get them started in understanding our distance tools, especially in how to create Gmails, how to get into Schoology, how to use Remind. Those are the things that they'll be watching. These are videos to prepare them. That way they know exactly what to expect in orientation class. Next slide. All right, intake process for the orientation part for distance learning. The student will be placed into the next available online orientation class. is to help the student familiarize with our distance learning tools. And during this time, they are assessed in math and writing classes, just in case they do need those classes as well. All of our online orientation is done through Schoology, and it's scheduled for Monday through Thursday, just for that 1 week. It is to focus on Gmail. Google Drive is to create the Gmail if they don't have one available, getting them familiar with Schoology, MobiMax, as well as doing assessments and others to assist the student. Once the student completes those 4 days orientation, they will then be placed into the classes the following week if space is available. So if there's no space available for that particular class that the student needs to be placed in, they'll be on the wait list, and then we'll contact them upon availability. Next slide, please. Anyone have any questions at this time?
Charlene, I am seeing a question from Laura asking, have you created an intake/orientation online checklist? Any kind of an online checklist for intake and orientation?
We don't have an online checklist as it is for orientation preparation. We just have that pre-orientation email template that gets sent to the student. This way they can see what we are going to be going through in class in orientation. So the orientation teacher does have things on their process that they take from there. That way they get the checklist completed. And that's where it's going to go into the next few slides, where I'll be talking about what the orientation teacher will be going through, especially if they are addressing the student needs. Like, and do they need a device? Do they have internet access? And what else, what other support do they need?
The only other question I see here, Charlene, is do you have weekly starts?
We do. We have the orientation, and then the following week after orientation starts, orientation completes, then we already enrolled them into the class. So yes, so the class is constantly ongoing.
Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions for you right now.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, next on to our next one is our class assignment, how the classes are assigned. The students are placed into reading, writing, and math based on their complete assessments. The chart below is a partial guideline that's used by the orientation instructors in placing the student for their classes. So this is just a partial guideline. It doesn't have, I don't have the whole process outlined here, but if you would like to know more information, you can definitely send me an email. But this is just a partial guideline of what it looks like. Next slide. Student support for intake process is really important for us because this is where, especially with distance learning, many students, especially our lower ELL, are not very tech savvy. So, and they may not even have the device or the internet access. So during this time, the orientation instructor will submit what we named it as is LSS e-help desk Google form. The orientation teacher will submit this form to us if a student is requesting for a device for a hotspot or just general questions like they need support in other areas, or if they need to meet with us one-on-one, or if, for example, or I've seen a lot of things where they want to change their schedule because before they must have stated that they wanted morning classes, but they may change it to PM now because their job hours change. So this is where the instructors will fill out this form. It's a Google form. And in turn, this Google form will be switched over to a Google Sheet that is shared among our learner support specialists and coordinators. And as you can see on the right side there, that's an image of what it looks like. There are status updates every time the requester sends, and every time there's an update, it gets automatically sent to the requester of the status of the request that they sent. Next slide, please. This is the last area here. Our student registration tracker. Once all that information is in, we want to make sure every student was not bypassed or was not skipped or was not missed. Like I explained before, their intake status definitions are there. It's duplicate registration, in progress, intake complete, no status. The duplicate registration is when the student submits it more than once. in progress, we're waiting for the student to complete and return all the pre-assessments, or we're still waiting for them to follow up with us because our contact with them was not successful and orientation was not yet scheduled. So it will be in progress. Intake complete will be marked once orientation class is scheduled and confirmed, and we are good to go. The no status is if student contact has not started yet. As you can see on the right side, we have a pivot table that automatically updates once the status change for the registration. There's a duplicate registration used. You can see that number is pretty high for the duplicate registration because students tend to submit more than once. Sometimes they think it was incomplete. Sometimes they think it didn't go through and they might try it again. In progress, that number is pretty, it's not too big. We're still waiting for some to complete their test or getting a successful contact with them. Intake complete. These numbers are from probably a week ago already, so it's not quite updated for us. The no status is where we're still having to contact the students. So grand total, that's where we stand with all of this based on this pivot table. Next slide, and I think that's about it. Any questions?
There is a question, Charlene. What do you use for online writing and math assessments and placement tools? Are you using online TABE testing?
No, the orientation teachers has a set of math assessments that they use, so it's not TABE. They are not using TABE for these, and neither is CASAS, but that is on the orientation teacher. They do have a set list of assessments that they provide, and it's not TABE related or CASAS related this time. I believe the curriculum had discussed what kind of math questions, especially when they are dealing with low level ELL or high level ELL. So, and then the ABE students as well. Those are majorly placed almost identical to the first assessment that they already took. That is pretty basic. It's the TABE 9, I believe, is the one that they take for the math. But ELL has a different math assessment that's different. It's not TABE related or CASAS related.
All right, I'm not seeing any additional questions for you, Charlene.
Looks like she wants a writing test example. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. The orientation teachers, what they've done before is they'll have the student like write about story just so they can see what their writing skills are. And that's all it is. It's just to have them write about story. A few lines, a few paragraph or one paragraph or a few sentences. It's just to judge what their writing skills are at. So because we have a writing 1 and 2 and 3. So that's just to judge just how much they know about writing. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. I hope that answers most of your questions.
Yeah, so I guess we sort of wanted to present both of our experiences, and then just sort of see what sort of questions people had, things that are working or not working, and sort of our thoughts on things that have worked for us and that sort of thing. So yeah, if there are any more questions, please, this is the time to do that.
While people are thinking about their questions or typing them, I'm
Yeah.
putting in the chat right now just a reminder about the flyer that has the Zoom links and the fact that our next session starts at 2. So chat out your questions for our presenters. This is your time.
Yeah, I'm sure Charlene and I could go pretty deep in the weeds on all the different steps in the process. But we kind of wanted to do sort of an overview to give at least how, 2 different programs are doing it. And I know like we are both pretty big programs in terms of size of the consortium or the school district. But I think sort of at my site, it's, it's one site that I'm sort of overlooking. So that might have some analogies for people who are doing intake and sort of like a one site sort of program.
Right. For Ruth Rodriguez with a question, for waitlist, we do have a few students on waitlist right now, especially our higher level ELL classes. We've had to create another class session, 2 more class sessions for those because of the wait list. We didn't want students to wait too long. So we did indeed have to create 2 more class schedules for those levels. The lower ELL, we're not having too many issues with that because it seems like the lower ELL students are not too interested in the distance learning. They're more afraid of it. So it's majorly for the higher ELL students and the ABA students. The tendency, the tendency part 2, that's broken up in different languages as well. So if they can choose whichever language they want in written in, it's all translated into the language. Somali, Spanish, Hmong, and English, those are the ones that's translated into at the moment. Any other great questions? You guys have really good questions. I was not quite prepared to discuss more than the intake part of it, because I think there was also another workshop for distance learning that our ABE was presenting. So hopefully I answered a lot of your questions about our intake process from a distance learning point. For intake at Minneapolis, we have 2 Spanish learner support specialists. There are 2 serving Spanish who speak Spanish. And then we also have 3 who speak Somali. And then I'm the only Hmong. So there's 1 Hmong person who can assist. We have coordinators, which I am one of the coordinators. I am in the information systems coordinator who deals with all of this system stuff, and as well as intake process and assisting the team out too. So there's 3 of us coordinators along with, let's see, 2, 3, probably about 5 or 6 learner support specialists. I've kind of lost count there because we just brought on board another person to help with the learner support services. So there's another person that came on board as well. So I kind of lost count where we are now.
And if there's anyone who doesn't want to spend the time writing a message and they just want to speak, I think this is probably a good time to do that. So you could, unmute yourself and ask a question of us.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
This is Mary.
Hey.
Mary Mead.
Aha.
Hi. Hey, you call all of your students? You call everyone? Am I
Yeah.
understanding correctly?
Yep. So that is my first attempt is always to try to call.
So I typically, my first attempt, I do email first because I think that allows them time to translate and figure things out. And then I set up a Google Meet with them. But I have run into, in the Meet, I've gotten in with some people who speak no English. They don't have a helper. And then I haven't even known how to say goodbye to them. Have you run into that?
Yeah, that is a thing that happens frequently. I can say for myself at least. Well, maybe not frequently. Many people are there, and then they will ask for a translator. Often there's family that can help, family or friends, and then there's a translation or interpretation service that our site has access to, and I've just started using it this week. Actually, I had a coworker who could speak Spanish that I would use for the Spanish speakers that were low level, but I've turned over to an interpretation service through our district
Okay, yeah.
this week.
I have seen that. And you need to set that up in advance, right?
It's somehow set up through our district, which is great. And I just have to call the number and press in the right codes and all that sort of stuff. And then they just ask what language I want.
You can, if you're in a Google Voice call with a student who doesn't speak English, are you able to use that at that moment, or do you need to set the call up in advance to use the feature?
I would have to call them back.
Okay.
So I would try to explain that in whatever simplest English I can, that calling back, and hopefully that would work and they would know to answer, because it would come from a different number too.
Okay, and then one other question. When you were talking about read theory and your use for placement, maybe I misunderstood you. So do they take the initial quiz and then additional 10 or 20 quizzes for placement, or what? How do you
for us, they are only required to take the pretest, which is it's a pretty blunt instrument. If they take more than that, then that's great, because then I can use that extra data.
Okay, all right. When we happen to be having them do 20 quizzes, so I was just curious, and sometimes that is hard for them, and I always make a point to explain to them that it might be too hard, and that I can well, then what I'll do is I'll just take them at whatever point they've completed, if I can see they're struggling in it. Okay, thanks. You guys offered really good information. It's super nice to get a better feel how other places are running their intakes. Thank you.
For sure. Thanks for the questions. I'm sure we'll be exchanging emails again soon, since you're also at Metro North with me.
Yeah. I sent you one this morning before this.
All right.
Thank you.
Looks like Laura has a question. She said, do you have many GED or ADP students? For us in Minneapolis, ABE, we do have many GED students enrolled as into the program as well. So doing the intake, I do notice quite large. I don't have the exact number because I did not anticipate to run those pivot tables based on different types of students. It was just based on how many registrations that we were receiving all together. So I don't have the exact number of how many we received for GED or ELL or, or the ADP students on a separate level. Not sure about Metro North to see what you have.
In terms of GED, I would say are probably a little bit higher ratio than we had before. Our people trying to get their GED, but not totally out of the ordinary.
Well, the reason I asked is I noticed that's all mostly what we don't have any ESL. It's all GED and adult diploma. But they, for some reason, even on their phone, I created the online form that they could just click. They're not doing it. They want me to send them through the email or documents, and then they say I can't find them. I'm like, it's on the attached email, or just click this link. And then I'll email them, give them the link to do online. It's on Facebook. So many different ways I have that they can just even register and start the process. And they're not following through on that. But they just want me to start giving materials. I was like, I can't until, like I said, this is great. You have this process they have to go through before you give them any class materials. My group just wants materials to get going without doing all the steps that I need. So thank you, because I see that the value is like, you have to do these steps first. And I like your flow chart, as we've had to recreate ours, and it really helps for them to visually see, you need to do this first. Now I will set you up in the class. So thank you.
Yeah, great question. And yeah, that's part of the reason I like doing the phone call, is just like to sort of answer any questions I have and explain sort of the process and sort of why we need it. And obviously it takes more time, but if it translates into people getting into the right place, then that seems to the good, I guess.
All right. Well, we are at the end of the session. Thank you so much to our presenters. That was great. Thank you so much to our ASL interpreters. We appreciate your being here. And thanks everyone for attending. I just posted the flyer with links. So hope to see you at the last session of the day at 2 o'clock in just a few minutes. Thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks for being here, everyone.